A revolution is underway. A transformation in our understanding of life on Earth. Using new technologies, reaching for new insights, scientists are writing a new history of the animal kingdom. By studying nature's unsung heroes, creatures almost beyond our imagination, they're uncovering the deepest roots of our own origins.
The whole field is open again. We're back to investigating where we came from.
It is the story of animal life and how it came to be. An epic tale that can finally be told. Like all good stories, it begins with a quest for basic answers about life itself. Where did we come from? Was there a first animal, one that gave rise to us all?
I'm obsessed with learning where we came from. Where did the organisms come from that gave rise to complex animals?
Incredibly, a first animal group has now been identified. A mysterious creature whose descendants are still alive today.
They're just so alien, so old, so ancient, and so different to anything else you find. They're just magnificent.
Join us now on the search for the first true animal, the primal. Biologist Rudi Raff doesn't appear to be much of a revolutionary. But he is a key scientist who is helping to forge a new understanding of how animals arose on Earth. He's helping to reconstruct a radically new history of animal life.
50 years ago, people would have thought we knew all that there was about animal evolution, about the relations of animals to each other. The whole field is open again. Genes and paleontology have opened these problems back up, and we're back to investigating where we came from.
Raff and his colleagues are wrestling with mysteries that have perplexed scientists for centuries. The questions are as daunting as they are profound. How did life on Earth become so diverse, encompassing millions of species? How did animals come to be designed the way they are? And what do their shapes tell us of their history? How has the struggle to survive molded the shape of life? And what can we learn from the survivors? And how did we humans arise from the complex tapestry of life on Earth?
This is really a very exciting time to be looking at evolutionary biology. There are three strands to the story that are beginning to grow and weave into each other to produce a really strong story. The first is paleontology, which is beginning to make new discoveries and has filled in a lot of gaps in our knowledge of extinct animals.
Scientists are also deciphering the genetic secrets of how animals living today have acquired their shapes. And finally, we can combine DNA sequences and anatomy to construct the animal family tree in powerful new ways.
Over the past roughly 2 decades, the tools are there coming from genetics and molecular biology, recombinant DNA work, and classical embryology and paleontology. All these different fields are all coming together. And all of a sudden, people are talking to each other who never had any opportunity or reason to before.
In their quest to peel back the past, eon by eon, layer by layer, researchers are traveling the world, finding clues in lands strange and familiar. The case that they're building, the story they're writing, is filled with unpredictable twists and turns. It is a voyage through time. An adventure in natural history. A story full of unknown characters and unsung heroes.
This is not some ancient, slow, stupid creature. This is a survivor. It's a survivor for a good reason. You don't last 500 million years if you're poorly adapted.
To understand what is being discovered is to see life exposed as it never was before, in all its horror and its beauty. From the most delicate creations to the most complex, we will meet fantastic animals that seem at times to border on the surreal. We will encounter the monstrous, the mysterious, and the truly marvelous. But our story begins with a simple question. Was there an animal Eve that gave rise to all of this stuff? Cristina Diaz. She hasn't come to the island of Sulawesi for its lush forests, but for the diverse community that thrives in its undersea domain.
For me, a biologist, to be here in Sulawesi, it's an event beyond my dreams. As it is one of the richest places on Earth in terms of biodiversity, and this makes me feel like I'm one of the luckiest people in the world.
Just below the calm and tranquil waters of Sulawesi lies a bustling world. It is a place we can visit only briefly, but it's home to a spectacular variety of animal life.
Down here, you are in another world. I feel so comfortable and so part of something very large. It's a world of colors and sounds that it's very hard to describe.
It's almost like a silence, but it's a silence that is full of crackling and full of life.
In this thriving seascape live familiar animals, as well as others both perplexing and alien. Where others might see a collage of colors and shapes in these waters, Diaz sees pattern and order.
I am a taxonomist, and as a taxonomist, what we do is that we attempt to organize the incredible diversity of life that surrounds us.
Diaz is part of a long line of scientists and philosophers determined to organize life, and so make sense of it. This desire to categorize living things is almost as ancient as science itself. Aristotle was perhaps the first to codify a system for classifying animals by their internal and external similarities. During the mid-1700s, the Swedish botanist Carolus Linnaeus developed a standard method for naming organisms. He introduced the idea of genus and species. To him, animal organisms were perfect and unchangeable creations. 100 years later, Charles Darwin shook the world. His theory said that species could actually change over time. What's more, it also implied that all animals may have descended from a single common ancestor. Darwin suspected if only we could travel millions and millions of years back in time, that we could witness the birth of the Earth's first animal. In the beginning, the Earth was devoid of living things. Then, about 3.5 billion years ago, something completely new appeared: life. For 2.5 billion years, single-celled organisms dominated the Earth. They were minuscule creatures, completely enclosed in a fragile membrane. These were living, pulsing beings, but they weren't animals. Somehow, cells developed a language that allowed them to work together. When they did, it was a turning point for life on Earth. The very first animal had begun to take shape. But what was this first creature?
The first animal would really have been something very simple. It would not have had a head, a brain, a mouth, or any internal organs, not even bones. It would have been something made up of a bunch of cells, a bunch of animal cells. Those cells would have to cooperate, to work together for the common good of the animal.
Incredibly, such an animal still exists, and it thrives in these waters. And that is why Diaz has come to Indonesia.
Okay, here we are. Here you have the city of Nado, and to the north you have Nado Tua and Bunat.
Local legend Hans Batuna is a retired medical doctor, affectionately known as the grandfather of diving in northern Sulawesi.
There are caves in any
And
of the
there are
islands?
caves there, especially in Nado Tua.
Batuna knows exactly where Diaz can find what she's come to study and points the area out to her.
What's around there. And there's a very deep trough here, and here the Mariana Trough.
He tells her that she must go to the foot of a volcano called Manado Tua. She must look for a reef that ends in an underwater wall, plunging hundreds of feet into the depths. There, she will find what she seeks. Ever since Darwin put forth his theory of evolution, scientists like Diaz have puzzled over animal origins. At long last, she and others think they have found a creature that links us to a moment in deep time, to the first animals of Earth. It is a creature that is somewhat alien in its appearance, a being without a nervous system, muscles, limbs, or a brain. Its body is defined by a loose assemblage of cells. It is the ancient sponge.
When I encounter a sponge, it just takes my breath away. I just want to stop and look. You know, they're just so alien, so old. I mean, so ancient and so different to anything else you find in the bottom of the sea.
To help her unravel the mysteries of the sponge, Diaz has teamed up with biologist and conservationist
Hi there, Christina.
Hi,
Welcome to Bunaken.
thank you.
Erdman has spent years as a marine researcher in Indonesia. He knows these waters and the reefs they harbor. Today, Diaz has her sights on a reef wall that drops hundreds of feet into the deep. Together, she and Erdman will descend the cliff face, searching for sponges that live only here.
There's quite a few very interesting sponges down where the coelacanths live, down in the caves.
Really?
Yeah.
So many undescribed species in this area.
The samples they collect will provide a window into a fascinating world, the microscopic realm where sponges are most active and dynamic. Sponge cells are unique in the animal kingdom. But in order to study their miraculous abilities, Diaz and Erdman will have to gather living samples and transport them to the lab.
We need sponges to study in the lab, and so we have to collect specimens. But we need to just cut a small section to be examined, and because it doesn't have a nervous system, we are not really hurting it. In time, the cut area will grow again as if nothing had happened to it.
All animals rely on cell-to-cell communication. But Diaz and others have been able to show that sponge cells have a unique way of working together. To witness their abilities is to be amazed.
incredible sight to witness.
These ghostly exhalations are proof that the sponge is actively pumping. With no mouth, it sucks water directly through its sponge-like body walls, which are shot through with millions of narrow canals and tiny chambers. How does it do it? What secrets hide within the belly of this beast? The best way to find out is to enter one of the many portals into the sponge's secret inner world. Drifting along with countless single-celled organisms, we feel the tug of a current. In the wonderland within, this sponge's cells all work for the common good, but they do it in wildly different ways. As the current draws us on, we pass sponge cells that are making new spicules. The walls themselves are treacherous. They can simply engulf their unfortunate prey. As we are drawn through ever narrower passages, the current slows until we burst into one of the sponge's millions of tiny, beating hearts. These are choanocytes, cells whose whip-like flagella powers the pump. The flow quickens again as it whisks us away through the labyrinth of canals that lead out into the sponge's central cavity. What once seemed barely alive is actually a living animal, more complex than we could ever have imagined. The sponge's pumping does more than satisfy its hunger for food. In fact, its sex life depends on pumping as well. 500 million years ago, these were the very first animals to reproduce sexually, the first to combine sperm and egg to create offspring. Set adrift, some sperm will be lucky enough to enter another sponge of the same species. If the sperm are truly fortunate, they will fertilize the eggs within. Our intimate tour of the sponge reveals a creature full of surprises. From feeding to reproduction, it engages in elaborate behavior. More than a mere aggregation of cells, the sponge is in fact a living, thriving animal. Though of ancient design, sponges continue to thrive in today's diverse and crowded world. In fact, they play a vital role in the lives of many other animals. Since they first appeared, sponges have formed a multitude of strange, symbiotic relationships. These sea cucumbers, just a few inches long, take advantage of the sponge's pumping action. As food particles that are too large for the sponge to absorb flow by, the sea cucumbers use their tentacles to snag them. It's a free lunch, all thanks to a sponge. On Indonesia's crowded reefs, sponges provide sanctuary to a whole host of different creatures. Small species of fish hide within their walls or perch cryptically upon their turrets. In return for a safe haven, some animals are willing to give up their freedom permanently. This little sponge is called Venus's flower basket. As it grows, it weaves its glassy spicules together, sometimes forming a living refuge for a pair of shrimp. Here, they mate and grow. And if they become too large to escape, they are confined forever within this prison of spun glass. Sponges unwittingly protect their animal partners in other unusual ways. The sponge crab clips off a piece of sponge and then proceeds to wear it like a hat. Since most sponges are inedible, the crab benefits from the camouflage. But not all sponges are so easygoing. Asbesta pluma is a sponge that kills. Its hair-thin spicules are covered with tiny hooks, perfect for snagging a helpless crab larva. Specialized cells ooze out of the sponge's body, migrate around its prey, and digest it alive. With cells wandering in and out of its body, this sponge seems like a character from science fiction. Not a likely candidate for the title of the first animal on Earth. Yet sponges are ancient, so remarkably old that scientists have often wondered if they were our forebears. Could it be that these primitive creatures, so different from other life forms, gave rise to all the other animals, including us? Questions about the origin of animal life have long plagued thoughtful minds. One man who's devoted himself to unraveling the mystery is Mitchell Sogin.
I'm obsessed with learning where we came from. And what I mean by that, not who your mother and father is or your grandparents, but rather where did the organisms come from that gave rise to complex animals like man, other species.
As an evolutionary biologist, Sogin pursues these questions at America's oldest marine station, the Marine Biological Laboratory at Woods Hole on Cape Cod in the northeastern United States. Working here, Sogin was quick to take advantage of promising advances in genetics and computer science.
Yes, these are diatoms from Nebraska. They're alkalophiles. Go ahead, Jenny, have a look. So these were isolated from lakes.
So if we can get some DNA from these guys by this week, we could probably set up some PCR experiments around Thursday or Friday. And we should be able to get a sequence from these things.
Mm-hmm. As new technology became available, Sogin decided to search the genes of different animals to see if he could demonstrate which one gave rise to all the others.
In looking for origins of animals, particularly from the perspective of a molecular evolutionist, you could take a top-down approach in which you say, I recognize that the first animals certainly were not cows or pigs or humans. They must have been something much more simple.
In the 1980s, Sogin set himself a challenging task: to discover what creature lay at the base of the animal kingdom.
Oh, wow. Both of these sponges look pretty good for this time of year, I think, Monica.
At the time, some scientists suspected the sponge. To solve the mystery, Sogin decided to look where few had looked before, inside the sponge's genetic code. First, he would have to get a clear view of the DNA inside their cells. It was laborious work, a painstaking process known as gene sequencing.
So what we want to do is get some of the healthier tissue here, so we're going to take just the tips. Genetic sequences are very much like blueprints for constructing an organism. It defines everything that there is to know in order to generate a body plan or to carry out metabolisms or physiology. You have a set of genetic blueprints that defines who you are. I have a slightly different set of genetic blueprints that defines me. It's very much like the blueprints for building buildings or cars or whatever it is you have to have a plan for making. We can compare the genetic blueprints of different things. So, for example, I can compare the genetic blueprint of an automobile. I can compare that to a covered wagon. And there are a minimal number of elements in that blueprint that are common between those very disparate kinds of vehicles. I can do the same thing in terms of organisms.
Sogin compared the genetic blueprints of sponges to those of other organisms.
Just this physical agitation would be enough to disrupt and disintegrate the cells, and we ought to be able to get the DNA out of there pretty easily, Monica.
Yeah.
He focused on a gene they had in common. But genes are not identical, and their subtle differences would be telling. If the genes of two animals revealed little variation, the animals were closely related. By grouping animals in this way, Sogin could trace a family tree. The animal at the base of the tree would be ancestral, or basal.
For a long time, biologists argued that sponges were basal to all other animals in an evolutionary tree. But there really wasn't any objective, certain way to make that claim until the advent of molecular sequencing capabilities.
In order to compare gene sequences, scientists must first extract the DNA from the nucleus of cells. The living code can then be reduced to data that the scientists can analyze. There is one magical moment when DNA can actually be seen with the naked eye. These delicate threads carry the instructions for making an animal and a fascinating record of the way that animal evolved. All animals depend on these same molecules to give their bodies shape and form. This is the very stuff of life. Today, powerful machines have taken over the arduous task of analyzing genetic sequences. Dozens of different organisms can be compared at once. What used to take months of exacting lab work can now be done in a single day. Mitchell Sogin could quickly sort through reams of genetic information.
We pick out genes that we think are appropriate candidates to study, and we precisely determine the sequence of that gene. from a sponge and compare it to the same gene that you find in a jellyfish, compare that to the same gene that you find in a fly, a fish, frog, a human, etc.
The gene's code is written in a series of 4 letters, thousands of characters long. Sogin focused on one particular gene to see how it changed and varied in the DNA of different animals. Honing in on a specific region of the gene, he began a search that could lead to insights about the evolution of animal life. As he churned through sequence after sequence, animal after animal, the family tree was slowly revealed. At the end of the long and arduous process, Sogin looked at the bottom of the tree and found his answer. At the base of the entire animal kingdom lay the sponge.
Sponges lie at a critical juncture in the evolution of more complex life forms on this planet. They're clearly basal to the other animals. They come from a unicellular world, and that's a major achievement, because now you can imagine development of greater organismal complexity. In this particular state now, sponges had already laid the seeds for the evolution of animals that you find distributed throughout the animal world. And the very fact that sponges lie at the base of the animals means that all other animals in some way, shape, or form would have come out of this simple architecture of an organism.
Sogin discovered that sponges had transformed the nature of life. Where mainly single-celled creatures had thrived before, the sponge was the first multicellular animal.
Humans, rabbits is really a very recent event, and yet